first of all, you know, the pathos of each little box being isolated from the next in many cases, particularly as the time goes on, you know, and new subdivisions are made. I noticed as the plane landed, you know, these boxes are placed ever more closely together. And so there is a pathos of the individuality, you know, the question of what choice do people have, you know. I mean, that's one of the paradoxes of the so-called market society, I think, because in many aspects the market is rigged and people don't really have a choice, right? The market's rigged by the combination of the banks, the mortgage companies, and the building regulations, and the home building industry. It's all symbiotically connected, and the market is rigged, basically. Why is it that Germans and Austrians and Swiss are willing to live close together, middle class, I mean, and the Anglo-American middle class are, generally speaking, not willing to live close together? I mean, well, they do, of course, end up living close together. It's an absurdity, because they're living close together anyway. But you know, why the houses must not join each other? I remember, you know, looking at a suburban house in which, and it struck me, I think even then and subsequently I've often thought about that, where the front garden is, it's not so true in North America actually, but in England the front garden is treated like a kind of parterre, you know. Then there is the house, and the back garden is where people grow vegetables, you know, or did in that moment. And therefore, you know, in a way, it's a kind of landed, it's a filtered down 18th century sort of gentry model. You know, the front is the kind of classical garden in front of the villa, and the back is the farmland. You know. It even goes back to sort of Palladian roots, in fact, in a way. That, I think, you know, is connected to, probably to the first shocks of industrialization. I mean, I think that the whole arts and crafts movement was, in a sense, an attempt to compensate for the ruthlessness of the initial industrialization. And I think that that's even true in, you know, in you know, the new world, so to speak, in the Americas. This idea of this uprootedness is you know, sort of, by definition, you could say. If we forget, I think, the extent to which in Europe, you know, agrarian populations were also uprooted, you know, and packed into workers' towns and used in relation to, you know, industrial production and so on. And I think that that internal migration in Europe to do with industrialization also had a sort of psychosocial impact on society. And in a way, I think that that's the kind of issue that architects ought to sort of try to confront in a way, you know, that recognize in a sense, you know. I think it was easier for, say, the Scandinavians to make this transition because they weren't so heavily industrialized, and they didn't have, in the first place, and they didn't have such huge populations, you know, so that the scale of there wasn't the same level of uprootedness, I don't think. It seems to me that Aalto is one of the few architects that have really was able to address this issue. You know? Was able to produce a kind of warm residential fabric accessible to the society. I think, you know. It's very hard to find the ground in which to produce an alternative discussion, you know, to raise another kind of consciousness. I think it's hard.
So, but in a sort of high modern, like Frank Lloyd Wright, he spent I think his largest file was on the Usonian house.
Yes, well, I mean, the Usonian house is an astonishing thing, and I've said for a long time, I think that the Usonian house is the last time anyone made to render the suburb as a place of culture, you know. I mean, the invention is astonishing, you know, and the number of Usonian houses he was to build, you know. But in a way, they're all very modest, right, by compared to today's extravaganza, you know. I mean, they're very beautiful places to live in, but they also mean you would have to be prepared to live a relatively modest life, right? I mean, a very comfortable life, but a modest life. And but it's amazing, the Usonian house, I think. And in a way, Wright is undervalued in a way, I think, in general. And there, of course, the question of the image of home is right there, right? I mean, if Aalto is one case, I mean, Wright would be a more pertinent case to give as far as North America is concerned.